Welcome aboard a journey through the golden age of North American aviation. We'll revisit the legendary airlines that once ruled the airways: Pan Am, TWA, and Eastern Airlines. These trailblazing carriers weren't just airlines. They were symbols of innovation, luxury, and the spirit of adventure. From Pan Am's pioneering international routes to TWA's glamorous jet age innovations, and Eastern's rise as a domestic titan, their stories are filled with triumph, ambition, and enduring legacies. Founded March 14, 1927 by entrepreneur Juan Trippe and a group of investors in Key West, Florida, Pan American Airways, known widely as Pan Am, was born. The initial route was an airmail service between Key West, Florida and Havana, Cuba, where Pan Am secured the airmail contract by completing the first scheduled flight. Expansion saw Pan Am quickly expand throughout Latin America, pioneering international air routes. Fleet development saw the introduction of the famous Clipper flying boats, enabling transoceanic travel. Pan Am's aircraft became a symbol of luxury and progress. By the late 1930s, Pan Am operated transatlantic and transpacific routes, making it the first airline to truly connect the world, and Pan Am pioneered long-distance navigation techniques. Pan Am expanded routes to Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America, solidifying its status as a global carrier. It was the first U.S. airline to adopt jet aircraft, introducing the Boeing 707 in 1958 for faster and more efficient international travel. Known for its first-class service, Pan Am became synonymous with glamour, luxury, and the adventure of flying. The airline was a cultural icon featured in movies, advertisements, and even influencing the design of stewardess uniforms epitomizing mid-20th century style and sophistication. Pan Am faced significant financial losses due to a combination of interconnected factors, including rising operational costs, increased competition, and poor financial decisions which gradually eroded its profitability and stability. This included the oil crisis of 1973, where the sharp increases in oil prices caused by the embargo dramatically raised operating costs, particularly with Pan Am's heavy investment in the large Boeing 747s. Pan Am, with its focus on long-haul international flights that required large amounts of fuel, were particularly vulnerable. Another challenge was Pan Am's lack of domestic routes, unlike its competitors. This made Pan Am dependent on international travel, leaving it exposed to economic downturns and fluctuations with global travel demand, such as that from the global economic recession of the mid-1970s, which heavily reduced demand for international air travel. Among this turmoil, Pan Am was involved in the world's worst aviation disaster in 1977 at Tenerife, which resulted in the deaths of nearly 600 people. Furthermore, to grow domestically, Pan Am's acquisition of National Airlines for its domestic network in 1980 was an expensive attempt to compete in the deregulated domestic market. The $400 million deal added financial strain and operational challenges as integrating the two airlines proved difficult. Adding to this, the Airline Deregulation Act of 1978 intensified competition by allowing new entrants and enabling other carriers to lower prices. Pan Am, with its high operating costs and reliance on international routes, struggled to adapt to this more competitive environment. To offset its mounting losses, Pan Am sold assets, including its Pacific routes, to United Airlines in 1985 and its prized Heathrow slots to other carriers. The airline was forced to cut routes, reduce staff, and scale back its global network. Financial instability led to declining service quality, tarnishing Pan Am's reputation as a premier international airline. The 1988 bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, severely damaged the airline's reputation, where Pan Am was found part liable due to flaws within its security processes. Pan Am remained a concern to the public with its extensive international network, making it a high-profile target. Mounting debt and continued financial losses forced Pan Am to declare bankruptcy in January 1991. On December 4, 1991, after a merger deal with Delta Airlines failed, Pan Am ceased operations after 64 years of pioneering aviation. TWA was established in 1925 as Western Air Express, which merged with Transcontinental Air Transport in 1930 to form Transcontinental and Western Air, creating a unified carrier with a broader network and resources to expand coast-to-coast services. Initially focused on mail and passenger services, TWA connected key cities across the U.S. including New York and Los Angeles. In 1939, billionaire Howard Hughes acquired a controlling interest in TWA, marking the beginning of the airline's transformation into a major global carrier. During World War II, TWA played a pivotal role in supporting the war effort, leveraging its fleet, expertise, and strategic connections to contribute to both military and civilian aviation needs. Renamed Trans World Airlines in 1950 to reflect its global ambitions, TWA also introduced advanced aircraft like the Lockheed Constellation, which became synonymous with luxury and speed in the 1940s. TWA became known for its high standards in passenger comfort, including spacious seating and gourmet meals. TWA was among the first airlines to adopt jet technology with the Boeing 707, enabling faster and more efficient international flights from 1959 with a strong focus on passenger experience. TWA expanded service to Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, solidifying its reputation as a premier international airline with frequent services. In 1962, TWA opened its futuristic Terminal 5 at New York's JFK Airport, a landmark in aviation and architectural history. The 1973 oil crisis sent jet fuel prices skyrocketing, drastically impacting TWA's costs with its reliance on fuel-intensive Boeing 747s on its global routes. The Airline Deregulation Act of 1978 led to financial instability and increased competition from domestic and international carriers, eroding TWA's market share. A series of management changes and ownership struggles, including Carl Icahn's controversial leadership in the 1980s, weakened the airline, including later a lawsuit against Icahn for selling heavily discounted TWA tickets through a travel agency company owned by him, worth a total amounting to many hundreds of millions of dollars over a period of 8 years. A failure to modernize and aggressive cost-cutting measures to maximize short-term profitability, such as selling profitable routes and assets, stripped the airline of its most valuable revenue sources long-term. Also, a long flight attendant dispute and strike in the mid-80s disrupted operations and led to significant financial losses, highlighting tensions between employees and management. Despite heavy restructuring efforts and many concessions from its employees, TWA declared bankruptcy 3 times between 1992 and 2001 due to mounting debt and operational challenges. The devastating 1996 crash of TWA Flight 800 from New York to Paris caused by a fuel tank explosion further hurt the airline's reputation and finances. The significant loss of public confidence in the airline reinforced the perception that the airline was not keeping pace with industry safety standards. Despite efforts to recover from financial distress, operational inefficiencies, and reputational blows, TWA could not sustain itself. This led its eventual acquisition by American Airlines in 2001, officially ending TWA's operations after 76 years of service. Pitcairn Aviation was established in 1926, primarily operating mail routes under the U.S. Air Mail Act. The airline was renamed Eastern Airlines in 1930 after being purchased by General Motors and merging into its aviation business division. In 1938, World War I flying ace Captain Eddie Rickenbacker acquired Eastern, transforming it into one of the leading U.S. airlines. Eastern capitalized on the post-war aviation boom, focusing on domestic routes along the U.S. East Coast and to Florida. The airline became a leader in the development of air travel to the Caribbean and Latin America. Eastern pioneered the use of advanced aircraft like the Lockheed Constellation and later the Douglas DC-7, which enhanced passenger comfort and range. In 1961, Eastern introduced shuttle services such as the popular Eastern Air Shuttle between New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C., which offered no reservation high-frequency flights. Eastern adopted jet technology early from 1960, acquiring Boeing 720s, DC-8s, and later Lockheed L-1011 TriStars, which became the backbone of its fleet. These jet expansions enabled Eastern to become one of the big four airlines in the U.S., alongside American, United, and TWA, with Eastern able to dominate routes along the East Coast and to Latin America. By the 1970s, Eastern was one of the largest airlines in the world, flying millions of passengers annually and generating substantial revenue. Tragedy struck in 1972, where Eastern's most notable crash involved Flight 401, and Lockheed L-1011 headed from New York to Miami, killing 101 people in the Florida Everglades. Despite the accident, Eastern was able to rebuild customer confidence with adoption of stricter maintenance protocols, enhanced crew training, and reassurance in advertisements of its commitment to safety. Like all airlines, the 1973 oil crisis significantly increased fuel costs, impacting Eastern harder as it had many short flights on the East Coast and to the Caribbean, where more takeoffs and landings require more fuel burn. The airline's route network meant it couldn't easily shift operations to more profitable or fuel-efficient long-haul routes. Eastern's fleet renewal transition was slow, and maintaining a mixed fleet of older and newer aircraft increased maintenance costs and fuel inefficiency, compounding the impact of rising fuel prices. The Airline Deregulation Act of 1978 intensified competition, forcing Eastern to compete with low-cost carriers and more efficient rivals. Eastern's stronghold on the East Coast, particularly in Miami and Atlanta, faced growing competition from carriers like Delta and American Airlines, which began expanding their networks on Eastern's heavily relied-on routes. Eastern had one of the most unionized workforces in the industry, with strong unions representing pilots, flight attendants, and mechanics. Long-standing contracts made labor costs inflexible, limiting Eastern's ability to cut costs to compete with newer, non-unionized carriers. Struggles with unions, particularly the International Association of Machinists, led to frequent strikes and operational disruptions. These disputes were part of a long history of strained relations with employees and affected the airline's reliability and reputation. In 1986, controversial airline executive Frank Lorenzo acquired Eastern Airlines through his company Texas Air Corporation. Lorenzo was infamous for his aggressive cost-cutting strategies and contentious relationships with labor unions. Lorenzo promised to turn Eastern around by improving efficiency and profitability. However, his methods were highly unpopular with employees and damaging to Eastern's operational performance and reputation. Lorenzo's leadership saw severe layoffs, wage reductions, and asset stripping, including its lucrative Latin American routes and air shuttle. In 1989, a crippling strike by the Machinists Union caused major disruptions, further compounded when flight attendants, represented by the TWU, joined in a sympathy strike. Pilots, represented by the Airline Pilots Association, also participated in solidarity actions. Combined with Frank Lorenzo's aggressive cost-cutting measures, these strikes led to widespread operational chaos, including canceled flights, declining service quality, and significant reputational harm. The turmoil of Lorenzo's tenure stands as a cautionary tale about the risks of poor labor relations and short-sighted management in the airline industry. Despite efforts to restructure, Eastern was unable to recover from the financial and operational damage inflicted during the previous decade. Years of losses, fueled by the high costs of operating an aging fleet, expensive labor contracts, and a lack of strategic direction, left Eastern with unsustainable debt levels. Prolonged disputes with unions, including the crippling 1989 strike by the Machinists Union and other workgroups, further drained the airline's finances, leading to deteriorated service and customer dissatisfaction. Eastern filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on March 9, 1989. The bankruptcy filing was a last-ditch effort to save the airline, but ultimately failed to halt its decline due to lack of profitability and employee cooperation, in addition to an outdated business model that couldn't compete in a challenging economic environment of the early 90s. Eastern ceased operations on January 18, 1991, and its remaining assets were sold off, marking the end of the once iconic carrier that had been operating for 65 years.